in living life, thinking about conventions and traditions and what ideas are out there, we need to analyze certain things to see if they're right or wrong. And they should come up in education. We should not reject all anecdotes or traditions or conventions. As Baron Heinrich, the great biologist, says, to reject all anecdotes is also to reject truth. We should look at what things are in a tradition or convention and why. And then, yes, reject the ones that aren't true and accept the ones that we find are true or that seem practical, but we don't know why yet. It's come up in history. So once upon a time, in different traditions around the world, I don't know all of them, no one knows everything. We all have stuff to learn. But in the Jewish traditions, from what I've read and from what you can see here, like on Wikipedia and stuff, hand washing was part of a religious ritual. There was requirements to do it. It's supposed to be in the Torah. There are occasions for hand washing: before eating bread, after eating bread, before eating dipped fruit or vegetables, before worship, before the priestly blessing, after sleeping, other occasions. After touching parts of the body, after touching a part of the body which is dirty or customarily covered, such as the private parts, back, armpits, inside the nose or ear, the scalp, but not if one just touched the hair, or the sweat from one's body, excluding the face or one's shoes, unquote. Quote, upon leaving a latrine, a lavatory, or a bathhouse, unquote. Quote, upon leaving a cemetery, upon cutting one's hair or nails, unquote. And, quote, after bloodletting, unquote. And then, quote, after participating in a funeral procession or coming within 4 cubits of a corpse, unquote. Okay. There's laws of washing, how much water to pour. And I think I've seen something before in a book on diet. They were talking about traditions and how some were good and they were lost. But I think it said water for washing hands, and in some cases clean sand could be used if water wasn't available. But this was known, and there were things in this, but it's like, as people do today, we wash our hands for a lot of different things because we know it's healthy. Then it's because God says so. Now, a lot of people do not do it because God said so, because it's like a religious ritual they learn, but just learn it growing up and everything kind of secular. It's like you do it just to stay healthy and clean and prevent the spread of disease. But some of this was known. Then lost in history, people disagreed, they scoffed at it. And then what happens later on in history, in the 1800s, Ignaz Philipp Semmelweis discovered that doctors should wash their hands to prevent childbed fever. And he was ridiculed. Because you had people like before, they might think they don't need to wash their hands. I'm clean. That's what these people would say. Some of these so-called doctors, we're gentlemen, we're not dirty. How dare you say that about us? And he knew something was there. It was inductively proven. He did experiments, showed controlled trials and stuff. And then when there'd be I don't remember what rate of disease outbreak when doctors would just go from patient to patient without, or they'd work on cadavers and then go do childbirth, and they wouldn't wash their hands. Genius. And Semmelweis learned that they should. It says, quote, despite various publications of results where hand washing reduced mortality to below 1%, Semmelweis's observations conflicted with the established scientific and medical opinions of the time, and his ideas were rejected by the medical community, unquote. So they were lost in their heads, in other words, and they thought they were gentlemen and all this other nonsense. So it was discovered later, and still some people had these bad ideas, so they rejected it. But if people would have maintained this idea, people would have been healthier all along. We would have had more operations that were healthy, a lot of situations that could have been cut back on or prevented, diseases, I imagine. But the thing here is thinking in principle, looking for what's really going on, looking for the material and cause effect versus maybe an explanation that's wrong. Explanations have been offered wrong by the scientific community through history. They did some stuff that's wrong and figure out what science is, what the correct conclusions are. It's come up in astronomy, as a lot of people know, in the theory of heat, in motion and free fall, the theory of the structure of matter, things like that, stuff in medicine, fitness, and all this. But if they could have been like Semmelweis, you could think, okay, well, people wash their hands in different situations. Like, why? We must be preventing something or stopping something, because it's like, and that's the role that God would play at the time. You wash your hands because God tells you to. If you don't, you get in trouble. Things are going to happen. God prevents things from happening without his approval and goodwill. Bad things will happen. And that's kind of the idea. So what cause-effect relationships, what's going on that make that happen? Look at the secular cause-effect material thing, as people started doing. Even back in Thales' time, Thales started looking to find explanations in the material world instead of saying Poseidon and his helpers made the ocean move. Whoever, like Zeus, would get mad, and hence there'd be lightning, things like that. That's how explanations would be, and that's kind of like this. We need to see that there's connections between things, and what we do matters. Connections between how we live and how we do things and our health. That's a thing that should have been developed and worked on, just like some people, for like another kind of example, to get some of this point in, some philosophers or some people would say, God is dead, therefore morality doesn't exist and we can do anything. Or some people who are religious don't even really take their religion seriously because they claim there's a God, but then who's omniscient and omnipotent, but then they think they can lie and get away with it, or they don't really take it seriously. The fact that it's not part of their thinking or the way they do things or their judgment or their assessment of what they're going to do. What are they going to say? Why? What are the consequences? So they think they just lie emotionally. And some of that could have been the reason, like, hence there's some of the commandments. Don't bear false witness and stuff like that. Don't take God in vain. Thinking of God as this omniscient thing, omniscient being, omniscient, omnipotent in the world. So there's, if for some people, they need to know that everything's connected, but that's how it could be at first, like it's God. And people need to think in principle to think, well, what we're talking about basically is interconnections amongst the world. There's like a retention of what you did, as if it's a memory. It doesn't go away. The effects on you are still there. And that's what some people didn't think abstractly until they think that if God's dead, we can do anything. There is no morality, there are no laws of the world, which is like ludicrous. When you do something wrong, it comes back to bite you, so to speak, because there's like memory in the world. If you have an idea, you keep acting on it. So you're going to keep having, if it's bad, wrong idea, you're going to keep having failed interactions with the world. And you'll do things that affect other people and affect things which come back and affect you. If you do something, have a bad idea, it affects the farm, your land, then you don't get as much crops. So there's this interconnectivity. We live in the world, we're embedded in it, we're not separate from it. So this is something, if people think about and believe in a God, this is something that can help them see that they can't just make short-term decisions. It's not going to happen. There's something out there that remembers and interconnects. Everything is interconnected. You got this omnipotence and omniscience. It's known. It's a fact. It's remembered. It's interconnected. So you don't wash your hands and then something gets on them, or there was something on them from, like, maybe you were hunting. Don't wash your hands, you eat, and then you get sick. Things are interconnected. That's basically what's going on. And then at the time, people didn't know how to do science. Thousands of years ago, they didn't know how to get longer cause-effect relationships, all this stuff. Didn't know electromagnetism, the heliocentric theory, the different syllogisms, the law of non-contradiction, the law of the pendulum, how to experiment, why to experiment, what concepts are, what induction is, and all this stuff. So they didn't get some of this. Didn't know how to get it, what the causes were, how to really figure it out. They were doing some, obviously, because we didn't come out of nowhere. Our knowledge, it had to be built up. But, way, way back, just like Poseidon or Zeus, Poseidon and his people making the waves, Zeus making the noise in the clouds, thunder. People could use that kind of God explanation to say that God punished you for not following the rituals. But there's this cause-effect relationship going. So the thing to get out of it is that there are the omniscience and omnipotence. There's memory in the world. Things are interconnected. So when we have an idea that is wrong, it will relate to other things. There'll be these cause-effect relationships all over the place that stay in the world that we're in, and that will come back to us because it's in our environment. We can't go around lying to other people without that changing how they treat us. Or likewise, if we tell the truth, that'll affect how people treat us. It'll be like there's this beneficent effect of the God. But if you do something correct and right and true, take care of your farm well, respect it, say thank you. Thank you to the land. Thank you to the plants that grow and the animals that govern the plants and the interactions they have. If you work with that and appreciate it, then you're embedded well in the cause-effect relationship in the total. And there's a lasting long-term effects. So it's like a memory. It's like everything being interconnected and coming back to you at some time or other all through your lifespan. Now, 5 years, 30 years. Or people also at one time said, those are quotes I was going to look up, but I forgot. That's the thing I forgot I was going to talk about, but I forgot. But I can do this kind of quickly. So there's one thing that people kind of started laughing at or ignoring that was stated in the Bible that's like relevant here too. That we know today is true, but people didn't really know then. So, where is it? Exodus 34:7, quote, "Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation," unquote. People go, yeah, huh, yeah, what does their choice have to do with our choice once people got the idea of free will? You can't do that. Like, what does my sin have to do with theirs? Misunderstanding this. And that's true ethically. A parent and child morally can be very different. Totally. Parent good, child evil. Parent evil, child good. Both good, both evil. There's all these mixes. But this is capturing a general idea that, if a mother or father, a parent, has some like bad habit, that can be passed on. And we know that today with epigenetics and the science of epigenetics. It's been proven in many different animals. People can study, what is it, like fish, some kind of guppies. I'll have to put stuff in the description field if I remember. Get some guppies, scare them in a certain situation, and that they don't fear in the wild, and the kids will react in the same way. And you can get biochemical evidence of it. Or there's an experiment with some mice or rats where one is shocked with the smell of cherry, and they get a fear response to that, and then the offspring have an inbred, because epigenetics, fear of it. It's not genetics. It's not in their genes. It's epigenetic. It's like you got the genes, and that's like a musical score, and that can be played in many different ways, like epigenetics. You can get a score and play it as classical music, epigenetics. Get it, play it as heavy metal. That's epigenetics. Genes, score, how it's played, epigenetics. Or get it and play it as jazz, or get it and do it as rap. You got a very different expression of the same score. Or twins, it's been proven with twins. You can get identical twins, not paternal, but maternal, identical twins. They can have different lifestyles, and they turn out very different. Of course, since there's some genetic and some other factors, they can have some similar things, but there's cases where one is weak and the other is strong. One gets cancer and the other doesn't, even though the genes are identical. Genes are not responsible for a lot of things. Or the gene project. People thought, people are so complex, we're going to have all these genes, tons of them. And then they find out they didn't have as many as they thought. We got less than like wheat, I think, modern wheat, and maybe less than an onion or something like that. I forget the exact things. But what is responsible for some of the complexity of people is not the genes. That's some part, but it's the genetic expression, the epigenetics. And that's what was captured here without people knowing about genes, epigenetics, chemistry yet. They observed factually the cause-effect relationship of the parents do this, they have this bad habit, they're drunks, and then it affects the kids. Or it's known today, like when kids get beaten and abused, then they have more of a tendency to grow up to beat or abuse other people too, and that can be passed on. Hence, quote, "Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation," unquote. And that's what has been found. I think people have done some experiments with cats. That might be criticized a little bit, but some things can last a few generations. Or with the famous experiment, some city that was being bombarded in World War II, I think it was, and cordoned off and people were able to use that like as a experiment to see for the kids before it and after it, the one who had enough food and not enough, how they turned out. But a lot of things like that. I'll put some links in the description field. A link to a good book a doctor wrote about things like that, how people are finding all these things about epigenetics, or even like in that book, I forgot the name of it, the doctor discusses a case where sometimes we're like, even if kids are not abused, but if the parents are very, like, if they yell at each other a lot, that can stress out the kid, like when they're 6 months or old or 2. And so they have a slightly increased risk of heart attack and cancer and some stuff like that. But there's a good example. Exodus 34:7. So that's one thing to do for some traditions and conventions, or just it's a good idea to think in principle. What's the empirical evidence in relationships there that we need to explain? Just like we shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. The general idea is we should think in principle, see what some things mean. See, even if one's religious, there can be a religious component and a secular component. God does things, you can say, omniscient, omnipotent, all this stuff interacts in the world. Or one or the other. But we need to see that there are interactions in the world that are secular, we need to take seriously, even if someone gets the explanation wrong. So we shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We shouldn't throw out the explanation with the explanandum, is it called? I forget the word right now. Fail, loser. The thing to be explained, in other words, there is the thing to be explained, because there can be no explanation without something to explain. Facts come first, and then we explain it. We can't ask why until we have something to ask why about. But we need to focus on that stuff, not get carried away with it. We have to we should tell the truth, because that mindset pervades everything we do, and it gets set out and established cause-effect relationships that become material, so to speak, hardened, set in the historical record, set in our brains and minds and function and how people interact with us, and in what we do with things and money and material things. And so we should be honest. If we're dishonest, there are certain effects. If we're honest, there are certain effects. It's an idea. It's a habit. It pervades things. There's memory in us, materialized memory, so to speak. There's kind of it gets materialized or put in the historical record in the material world, so to speak, kind of a memory there. All these cause-effect relationships and all these different areas. That's a thing we can think in principle and get out from thinking about what would be the secular real meaning of God. Or, if one believes in God, it wouldn't be real versus not real. There'd be God, and there'd be the stuff, and omniscient and omnipotent, and then all the stuff in the world, because you think it's is an expression of his will or her will or whoever. But we still have effects spread out more than the near term. And that's the thing, even as I say, some people think God is dead so we can do anything. No, everything's interconnected, whether you like it or not. You can't. Or some people think they're religious, and yet they don't take their religion seriously, or think that there's a God means everything's connected. You can't just do what you feel like. mentally, spiritually, and materially, you will be known. Temporally, you will be known. The here and now material is not all that exists. It's all connected. So you do something, it's known, it'll affect you later. Things are going to come back. There's this whole interconnected world, just like people would think all these thoughts of God are all interconnected. Everything's known at once. It all spreads like that, the consequences. So those are some things, some examples of thinking in principle and getting the full meaning of some traditions or myths and how to consider them seriously. So this is something we could do in other things. Read some story, read some myth. What are some deep themes and deep principles of it that we can get out of the tradition, the story, that whether we agree with it or not, or maybe they come up with a theme but get the wrong answer. It's something we never thought about, like things we know and take as common sense nowadays, or only because of the great genius of Plato and Aristotle. They had to build up on previous centuries of knowledge and identify some things that no one ever had before and that we never would on our own. It'd be clueless, off our radar, out of our awareness. But because they've come up with this stuff and it's in our world, we kind of take it for granted. We think it's like obvious, only because it's been developed in learning and thinking and our lifestyles from what they did. But we should get some ideas, like Plato came up with some stuff and we have a lot to learn from him, and that's kind of the point. There's things we might not agree with, we can still learn a lot from. So let's work on reason, think in principle, think about the broader implications of things. Everything's interrelated and how it matters. Let's use that wisdom to live better on our own and help other people live better. Peace.